Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's our regular Facebook Live, and this is our April edition. And we're having a little bit of a different format this time. We're on a Zoom call format that's being Facebook Live because we have a guest with us tonight. My first guest that we've had in any Facebook Live presentation, and our guest is Stephen Buffalo. Stephen is the leader of the president and CEO of the Indian Resource Council here in Alberta. And the Indian Resource Council is a very important organization that represents 134 Indigenous organizations across Alberta and Western Canada that are involved in the resource industry, obviously, primarily oil and gas, but other resources as well, in getting those interactions between government and the Native organizations ironed out so they actually function a little better. They work with the Indian Oil and Gas Canada as well, because that's the management organization. I know Stephen's going to have some input on that later in this presentation. But it's my pleasure, first of all, to welcome you all here and to introduce Mr. Stephen Buffalo. Stephen is, as I say, the president of the Indian Resource Council, but he initially is from the Samson Cree nation in just south of Edmonton, and that's Treaty 6. As I'm certain, even though we're Treaty 7 here. He graduated secondary school actually in Athol Murray College at Notre Dame in Saskatchewan. He went to complete a business administration degree at Medicine Hat College, continuing on to University of Lethbridge, where he completed a management degree in 1998. After that, he began working at PCL's Trust 2 days after he convocated and was there for 16 years before joining the Indian Resource Council. The president there now, he's leading it very well, but he's also involved in a number of other initiatives. He sits on the boards, including the first ever Indigenous governor for the Canadian Energy Executive Association, Samson Management 2009, University of Calgary Redevelop Initiative, St. Mary's University Calgary, and again, vice president of the Notre Dame Hounds National Alumni. So interesting background, interesting, well-rounded experience you have, Stephen. Welcome to this Facebook Live event, and happy to have you on and discussing all the issues around energy, which, as you know, I'm the Shadow Minister for Natural Resources in our caucus. Environment is part of that, and as you and I have discussed before, our resource industry is going to prosper going forward as long as we look at it from both a regulatory efficiency point of view, an environmentally progressive point of view, and an Indigenous involvement and economic development point of view. And of course, that one angle of the triangle is entirely dependent on people like you. So I would like to turn over the floor to you right now, Stephen, introduce your organization and what you're accomplishing. And we'll go into some Q&A after that, if that works.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Greg. I really appreciate this opportunity, and it's our job to really reach out to an audience that we not traditionally really who we work with, but your audience is someone we need to connect with, and we want to expel any myths and talk about some of the issues that are facing right now. And again, I appreciate the introduction. I left a small little banking career. Mind you, the trust company I was working for wasn't very active. We didn't have enough capital to really participate here in Calgary. However, I learned a lot, and it is really about relationship. And being in Calgary, you can't help but notice all of the oil and gas activity. I grew up with oil and gas with a pump jack half mile from my house, and it was. The resource sector has been really good to First Nations, oil and gas, and it really helped out a lot. Again, with IRC, we represent the oil and gas producing First Nations, and we advocate on their behalf. We advocate with government, we advocate with industry, and it's cyclical. There's good days and bad days, and I always look for the silver lining, and then unfortunately our resource sector and oil and gas hit the toilet, and oil companies discovered, hey, we're at the ground with them. And I think they discovered that, working together, we can do a lot more than really being apart. I think there's more barriers at $120 oil than there is at $50 oil.
Mm.
So if some of the companies can wean themselves off the caviar and the Dom Perignon and come have some bologna and some lucky beer, I think we'd all be very progressive and productive in that sense. But again, for the record, I'm going to tell everyone I'm a card carrying conservative. I hope there's change coming along. I just hope it's not expected next month or sooner than later. I know there's a lot of issues our industry and our government is facing, and I just hope to reach out to individuals that need to know the full story and kind of need to hear our side. And one thing I'll start with is one, not all First Nations oppose oil and gas, natural resource development, and want to blockade pipelines. Some of us are very proactive, and really we're beyond just getting jobs. We're really looking at the big picture now. We want to be part of the equity ownership structure and really have that voice at the table. And quite honestly, I think it's a better position. And I think one thing industry has found out is that we're a way better partner than fighting things out in court. And no one likes going to court because there's only the lawyers really only win in that situation. But at the end of the day, I think the government and its Supreme Court has really identified some key rulings, and it really advocates to the fact that First Nations partnership is inevitable, and that it should be looked at as a welcoming. And we're forgiving people. We'll forgive some of the things that happened in the past, but it's really about the future generation of not only our people but our children and our unborn children and our culture and our languages. And this is we're really trying hard, to take our place in this industry. And we've overcome a lot, but again, some of the things that happened in the past is kind of still resonate, and I guess that's why sometimes you see a protest on certain initiatives. But it's not consultation. I'll say it's more relationship building, and that's just not just with the industry. It's with governments and municipalities and everything like that. And when First Nations can benefit as well, then I think our country will go a long way.
Well said, Stephen. Thank you very much for joining me again here today, and your words. We really appreciate it. Let's get right into what we see as the obstacles in the current framework for the economic reconciliation that has to happen with Indigenous organizations across Canada. So if you can identify what those are, I think that it's instructive for so many of our listeners that will understand more and more about what we have to overcome here in order to move forward and getting some actual reconciliation and an economic perspective across this nation.
Right. Not to really get into too much of our history, but I think like here in Alberta, we're starting to teach our kindergarten and grade 6 about treaties, and what that meant to our Indigenous people here in Canada. And you look at our vast land, and you can see the resources that we have. Not necessarily oil and gas, but other resources that Canada offers. And I think from that standpoint, when we participate in those areas, it's beneficial for our country. We want to continue to work with government. We want to continue to work with industry, and it's a situation that it's really difficult for First Nations. The everyday Canadian does not understand that that most of the communities in Canada are really dependent on the Indian Act and the contribution agreements that the federal government offers to the communities. And that is a really no-win situation for anybody. The best business and analyst can go into a situation like that, and with the needs and what is required of our populations, it's just a no-win situation. Our demographics, our populations are growing. So the first thing is we really need to address that issue of finding an alternative to the Indian Act. Now, we look at our country, and we can be an oil and gas superpower if we want. But again, we come across the issues that we're seeing now, and that's the environmental protection. And sometimes you see the protests that have happened, for example, the Wet'suwet'en in northern British Columbia, and how that's being played out. And you can we can talk for hours on what is being said, but ultimately, that natural resource and that infrastructure project really needs to continue and get finished. And it's not only for the benefit of the communities that supported it, but it's for the world. I spoke at Queen's University a little while back, and I had two students from India come to me say, "We need your LNG. We got to stop burning coal." And that's one thing that does um, address that at that time. It's like we're still burning coal in the world. BC still exporting coal, and when we talk about protecting the environment and everything like that, we can't be hypocritical in still exporting that coal when we should be exporting the LNG, which is a little cleaner. But it's the whole issue with that whole blockade and the protest. It brings many streams that are kind of in our way, and to find our own self determination and to be sovereign, we really need to find the alternative to the Indian Act, and that was one way. And you're hearing about the communities along the Trans Mountain that want to be equity owners, and I think that needs to happen. We like there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, but collectively, I think the communities can be a big piece to that, and it's something different than being controlled by the government. And I'll let the Canadians know, and anyone listening today, a lot of us are done being controlled. Now, I call it a soft communism, but we have we have right now really no alternative. And the direction of this government going towards green energy, we supported 100%, but you can't get there without our oil and gas, and it's going to be a tough battle, but I think we can find the balance. That's what I'll say to you, Greg, is we're always looking for that balance, protecting the environment, and yeah, maybe making a little bit of money too.
You got to have balance at the end of the day. Stephen, Indian Resource Council was founded in 1987, so it's got a good history of representing the organizations, 134 organizations that comprise your council there, and it is oil and gas that we're talking about. But it was formed at the same time as Indian Oil and Gas Canada, which is the government's quasi crown corporation that controls the revenues that get funneled down into your organizations. And correct me if I'm off too much in the revenues, but at one point in time, a few years ago, that amounted to about $500 or $600 million per year, and it's gone down significantly. So it's about $20 or $30 million per year now. So it's an indication of how badly our differential, if you will, on what the price we receive for our oil in international markets has affected your organizations. So it's one of those things that everybody shares in this pain going forward here because we don't have egress of our product to market. Can you talk about how IOGC, Indian Oil and Gas Corporation, needs to change so that we actually have more of an involvement of your organizations in its facilitation of getting the proper financial benefits to your organizations?
Great. Um, Thanks for bringing up IOGC. I think of the devil all the time. But ultimately, the organization was started back in about '83, and then my colleague Larry, he's been there since day three. And really, again, the role was to advocate for the nations that produced oil and gas, because quite honestly, back then we really didn't have the capacity or understanding of the industry, and we learned the hard way. Let's put it that way. Left a lot of money on the table. 9 times out of 10, decisions were made for a lot of communities like mine, and we were told about it after the fact by industry and government. But it's kind of evolved to where now we're modernizing the Indian Oil and Gas Act, modernizing the regulations, and the cool thing is that our technicians, our people from our communities that have been in part of the process of oil and gas, are contributing to modernizing these regulations. So it's really starting to come full circle where, you know, we're slowly trying to take over, I guess, some sort of jurisdiction in implementing the regulations. But exactly, you're right on point when you talk about our revenues. Now, at one point, IOGC was collecting up to $500 million, and that was probably about 5 years ago in royalties for the nations. Just last quarter, we got a report from the president, Strader Crowfoot from IOGC, that the revenues are just under 35 million. And you know, I'm going to tell you that the ripple effects of this for our communities is that, well, first off, everyone in Ottawa thinks that the oil and gas producing nation is in Western Canada are billionaires, and that we're rich, and that we have all this money and whatever. And that's not true, you know. And quite honestly, people don't really understand that, you know, when IOGC collects these royalties, the government still controls it. Like, we have to apply to get that money back. You know, we got to apply to with a business plan, and we need to build 16 houses, and the minister has to approve it, which is ludicrous. Samson Band, former Chief Victor Buffalo, um, my dad, challenged that, and he took it to the Supreme Court, and we lost on one thing. One area we lost was the loss of revenue, because IOGC, being a special operating agency of the federal government, did not really act as a fiduciary trustee. They more or less just left our 350 million in a checking account. They didn't invest it in a GIC or a bond, for that matter. And my dad was a little upset, like, why wouldn't they do that? So he challenged it in court. But what ended up happening was that we got full control of that money. Because what started it was my dad went to apply to get some money to do some housing in our community, and he was boldly told no, you know, in with colorful metaphors, and the minister chased my dad out of the office swearing at him. You know, again, this is royalties that were collected on a reserve through oil and gas, and we had an initiative to build some houses. So we challenged them in court, and we won. I think probably the most primary thing was we won control of our money. So, you know, we have it in the Heritage Trust. It's at about 560 million now to date. And you know, that's just some of the progression that some communities do. But ultimately, you know, that supports, again, what the contribution agreement under the Indian Act fails to do. So when we have communities that don't have that luxury, that have spent their money, and there's a lot of social issues in a lot of our communities, you know, so we can't really address the issues of maybe some sports for youth. And again, we like to create our own social programs for the, I guess, the opioid crisis. You look now, there's a lot of murdered, missing Indigenous women. And you know, part of that I understand is that, you know, our young single mothers are going to the major centers, and because there's really no hope in the community to raise their children. And unfortunately, a stroke of bad luck, and they're part of the one of the statistics. You know, it's sad when, if there wasn't the mechanism to keep them at the community and maybe work, if they chose to, it should be there. And that oil and gas money used to help that. It helped young teams, hockey teams. It helped to build schools. It helped with bereavement costs. And you know what? It was sure a lifesaver to what the federal government didn't help us with. Because again, you know, I don't have time to do a history lesson, but
Yeah.
1932, the Natural Resource Transfer Act really took out our depth of a plow, as our national chief says in treaty. So the resources we thought we had were gone, and now we're susceptible to this. But ultimately, the Indian Oil and Gas Canada has supposed to be regulating and helping First Nations, and it's quite opposite, to be exact. You know, they really go after our band owned companies, our First Nation owned companies, and really put the screws to them in every way. But you know, there's those companies that nobody really likes that really get away with a lot of bad things, and but now it's starting to come back. You know, one of the initiatives that we were successfully getting, and again, it was a federal program, was a site rehabilitation program for abandoned wells. And this has really given First Nations some leverage. I'd like to just touch on that, Greg, if you don't mind. You know,
Absolutely.
since July, well, actually about May, we had the brain fart, but when it was announced, I knew our nations would have a hard time getting traction. And we advocated to the province and to the federal government that there should be a set aside for the First Nation lands, the wells on the lands. And at July, we found out there was about just under 1,800 abandoned wells on the communities in Alberta, not including Saskatchewan and British Columbia. So we asked our good friendly friend, the Premier, Jason Kenney. Well, actually, we had to ask him 4 times, but he finally agreed to do the set aside for the First Nations. And I'm happy to say, we've got a lot of traction. So we committed 15 million to the Métis settlements here in Alberta, and 85 million to the First Nations in Alberta. And so far so good. We're working with a company, Steel River Group, and they provided the expertise and the engineering. And right now we're building what we call the community plans to help the communities get traction for the money that's been allocated by the federal government. And it's really exposing, one, IOGC was asleep at the wheel and didn't have enough data, and two, it helps the communities identify what assets they have on their communities, and three, our First Nation people, our technicians, our laborers, our entrepreneurs are now getting to work. And that's really exciting for me. It's not a ton of money, but it's a start. I'm hoping through this process we can prove to not only industry but to government that we can do this work, and we can do it hand in hand with industry. And we're just needing some of the producers to step up a little bit. But ultimately, this is a success program that I think going forward, we're going to be approaching the federal government, and that might be you guys, to for another allocation to take care of all of our wells in our land.
Fantastic. One of the things you touched on there peripherally was the fact that the capacity you built in your communities, technicians and engineers. But the thing about IOGC is 34 years ago, you set up both your organizations, but now you've got the financial capacity to manage those funds and manage that trust yourself and ensure that you actually benefit from that hands-on, as opposed to having it, drip through government's hands through different organizations and then finally to you at the end of the day. So that capacity, I think, has proven itself, and I think you guys are well on your way, and we'll get towards the next iteration of what IOGC looks like in the near future. And I wish you success in your efforts to make that happen, and anything we can do to help. Of course, you've
Yeah.
got some allies here that need to recognize we need to change in that area.
Well, like if Greg, if I can interrupt you there, like IOGC, Indian Oil and Gas Canada, has been in the game for just over 25 years, and quite honestly, the relationship with industry in itself has been kind of foggy. And quite when you talk to the producers and the communities, they really need that third party out of the way. And really, what the nations need out of IOGC is regulatory enforcement. And through the whole process, and we've been working like since, no, I'll say this, in 1996, federal minister signed an MOU with relationship with IOGC and IRC. And that document keeps us at the table to continue to discuss dialogue. The table has been kind of tilted one way, but since I've been with IOC, I've been trying to tilt it our way. And part of one of the initiatives in the MOU was to take over IOGC. And we have that in the red zone right now. Some of the stuff we want out of IOGC is important. It's about jurisdiction and about creating and really being ourselves and creating our own sovereignty with our resources and land. Some of the regulatory stuff we don't want, so we'll keep that with IOGC. So that's one of the things we're really close on changing is changing that instrument, because I know like some of the producers I talked to downtown, the oil companies, they really want IOGC out of the way so the business can be done a lot better, a lot cleaner, and more transition. And I'm hoping we can get there before next year.
Good. Stephen, I've got a bunch of questions coming in, but I want to go through one other issue that I know people are going to ask about, And that's about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and how it's going to be interpreted going forward and how you see it applying to Indigenous organizations in Canada. If we can go into that and give a little, a little background on Section 35 rights and where
Sure.
we've come and the effect this might have there as well. I think that'd be really helpful. And if you can touch on free, prior, and informed consent in that process as well, I think it'd be instructive for everybody.
You know what? I won't comment on any of the articles specifically. I'm not a lawyer, and quite honestly, it puts me to sleep. But ultimately, from a human rights standpoint, the United Nations Declaration Rights of Indigenous People is very important, not only to our organization but every other organization that support communities. And human rights has now been identified, and I think there's a lot of good initiatives in the declaration itself. One of my other dads, I call him my other dad, is Dr. Willie Littlechild, and he was part author to this to the document. And I know I disappointed him to hell when I spoke up to say, hey, there's something wrong here with the free, prior, and informed consent, and he tells me not to worry about it, but you can't help it. And like again, just referring back to the Wet'suwet'en and what happened with that pipeline in I always share the story. In 2016, my colleague Larry had some bad pizza and really lukewarm draft beer in Fort St. John Airport. And he said, why can't we build a bloody pipeline? So we had this conference called Pipeline Gridlock. And once we announced it and did all of the social media and everything like that, I was getting phone calls and threats and people telling me you shouldn't do this, Mother Earth. And it was the environmentalists, and in fact, Greenpeace wanted to have a demonstration outside the Hyatt where we hosted the conference. And one key thing, and this is back in 2016, a young kid sent me an email and says, you do not have my free, prior, and informed consent to have this conference. And I'm like, what the hell would I need your consent for? But that's what has been instilled in these environmentalist people, is that say this verbiage. So you fast forward to the Wet'suwet'en issue and the hereditary chiefs. Now, you got to respect their tradition, their culture, and yeah, maybe that's a something that they have within that territory and the Wet'suwet'en people, But they also have democratic leaders elected. And my whole issue is like, who has the right to say free, prior, and informed consent? And like we saw what happened, and you've seen how the federal government responded. They gave everything they under the sun to the hereditary chieftainship when the other 10 nations along the corridor had structured deals, not only for jobs but for equity ownership, and that says a lot. Pipeline monitoring is something that needs to be done all the time, and I guarantee you, like, there was a lot of jobs lost, a lot of revenue lost to the communities because I think the infiltration of third party groups, my good friend Dr. Vivian Krause says, that have infiltrated Canada to landlock our resources. And this document is it could jeopardize economic development, not only stopping that. So I have a bit of a problem with that one line. And how do we fix it? Well, I have an idea. It's a simple word verbiage, but and wordsmithing, but I'm not a lawyer. And I want to see the document and the declaration accepted by Canada, but I want that one amendment made, so we don't have protests. Like you can protest, you can ask someone to stop doing something, but when it's a national interest, and I'll tell you some of the ripple effects after this point, when it's a national interest, then we're all hurting. Then we all hurt, right? So that's I'd love to see it changed, and I know he's gonna probably slap me around again, my my other dad, but I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking about our communities. Like we're stuck where we're at, and even if the conservatives get in next government, you guys can't fix what we have to deal with every day. We have to change it ourselves, and really being part of the discussion being at the table, not only with the government, but with industry. That's going to be the key, but we can't shoot ourselves in the foot with protesting and trying to stop these projects. Again, no one ever talks about the reclamation work. For example, like Suncor does in the oil sands. No one talks about the reclamation work we're doing now in the abandoned wells, and that's one thing that we should be proud of, because our people now have a say. They're being a part of the solution. And this SRP program that we're launched, we have a lineup of 400 young people that want to sign up, take the training so they can do the work. That's how adamant they are protecting Mother Earth. But the UNDRIP and the declaration, it's a tough one. And I don't know how that's going to be handled. I just hope it's not decided by a judge. That's all I hope.
And that's the issue, is that I think a lot of organizations have stepped forth and say, please define for us what this means, because we've gone through a decade of legal back and forth with lawyers and judges defining what Section 35 rights actually mean at the end of the day. And in the end, they're interpreted by courts. They're interpreted by, junior courts, and then senior courts, and then of course the Supreme Court. And then, everybody lives with the result at the end of the day. And that's a progression. And holding our infrastructure development back in Canada by 10 years is enough. And you think about 10 years of non-economic progress for all your organizations that you represent, that's a significant chunk of a whole generation's outcome. And those outcomes have to start getting better sooner rather than later. So that's my main concern. I think the main concern of many of us, and I hope you share that with me, Stephen, is that we do need to see results here. We don't need more legalese getting us in the way of actually developing and actually having solid results for our people going forward.
Right. Like the one thing I mentioned is ripple effects. So we look at all the infrastructure projects that have been canceled, Northern Gateway, Energy East. And you heard our premier before he was elected, actually after when he was elected, since 2011, Alberta contributed $262 billion in transfer payments to Canada. And what our protesters don't realize, our own people, is that the hard part is there's a little portion there for First Nations under the Indian Act. And that money funds all 643 nations that are receiving a contribution agreement under this system that doesn't work for us. So the more we do not collect this type of tax revenue, whatever you want to call it, we don't export our resources, the less that pot's going to be. And the less we can't deal, like right now, you're seeing the Indigenous Services Canada can't even accommodate one of the basic necessities of life, of clean water, in some of our northern communities of Manitoba and Ontario. And that's appalling. All the resources we have in Canada, how can we not address that issue? And if there's anything that I'm adamant about, is making sure that we can fix that. But the only way we can do it, and it's not taxing the Canadian up to 45%, it's exporting our resources that we have here in Canada. And the ripple effect will be positive towards us. Again, the Conservative gets in next election, you can't fix the Indian Act in those 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is. It's got to be a process. It's got to be in stages. But the door has to be open. We got to be at the table. And I think we can probably fix this if we do it right. But yeah, this declaration, I'm hoping it gets fixed by then, because it'll be detrimental to our country and detrimental to our people. When First Nations do well, the town next to it does well. When the town next to it does well, the major centers do well. When the major centers do well, Canada's doing well. So it just all goes hand in hand. It's a ripple effect. And I want to get there. I want to get there.
As we all do, Stephen. Thank you very much. One thing I think probably my last question before we get into the Facebook questions, and everybody on Facebook, feel free to send in your questions for Stephen, please. One thing, you've recently sent a video out to a famous American, and have you gotten a response back from that at all, Stephen?
Well, she sent me a workout video cassette tape.
We're talking about Jane Fonda.
I know. No, she sent me one of her workout videos. told me to get in shape. No, just kidding. But I haven't, and quite honestly, I think that was just kind of a one-time deal for me to do. I appreciate helping the Canadian Energy Center. And as well, it's the message had to be said. You know, I'll let you in on a secret. It's really hard for our Indigenous leaders to really speak up to that because 9 times out of 10, they have environmentalists in their own communities. And, being a politician, I've never been a politician, but
You'd be a
you
good one.
you want to make you want to make the people happy, and you're trying to make everybody happy. So some of the things you just don't say, they just won't say it, and that's okay, because they're really trying to take care of housing, social, education, healthcare in their communities. And to speak up to something like that might get them in trouble. And then again, they want to continue their term. They want to. So I had to say it. I figured it is my duty to say something, and I just hope that it opens her eyes a little bit. But I don't even know if she saw the video, but it
Yeah,
was.
a little background there. Stephen did a video addressing Jane Fonda's comments on Indigenous developments in Canada. So he spoke up very well. It's reminiscent of Leonardo DiCaprio coming in and beaking off about the environment in Alberta, a subject he didn't know anything about, but decided he'd opine on it. So Stephen took on Jane Fonda and said, "You want to have a real discourse about this and what it means for organizations in Alberta and the energy industry in Western Canada? Come have a discussion with me." And I guess she didn't pick up the phone, Stephen. So that's too bad. But I hope you're working on that workout tape.
Yeah. And the real story that people don't hear about is the partnerships that are up in Fort McMurray in the oil sands area, and the business development that was done with the communities up there. If anything, we can reference the East Tank Farm deal, oversubscribed, and the First Nations will benefit from that. But again, we really need to export that resource. I was very happy to see Biden announce the $2.2 trillion infrastructure. So I knew when he announced that, hey, you can't build those highways with solar panels. You're gonna need to. There's a way to create asphalt, and I know that's gonna be very useful. But at the end of the day, when they canceled the Keystone, again, I look for the silver lining. It just means that we need to find a different customer, but we need that infrastructure to do it. And I'm hoping that we can start developing that sooner than later.
Good for you. I'm going to go to the questions now that are being asked on Facebook because we've had eager questions, and I want to make sure we get to them. First of all, and sorry, it bounced on me here. I got a question from Bjorn, who's saying, given positive economic outlook for Canada's resource sector and Western provinces, where do you see the role of First Nations evolving in the near future?
Well, I think we're going to not only become partners, but we're going to start developing our own resources and capital funds and everything like that. Like the opportunities there, and with the way the industry and I guess I'll say society with the ESG, that's really opened the door. Again, nobody wants to fight in court anymore. And again, I think we developed the fact that partnerships go along a lot further than to be adversaries. And you know what, I'm seeing that as the development continues, and again, we're looking to find that balance, and to make sure that we protect the earth, protect the environment, but in the same sense, we got to be able to make money for our needs and everything like that. It's a positive trend, and we're prepared to be a part of the equation now, as opposed to someone holding out a hand waiting for the crumbs. So it'll come.
Okay. I got some different questions here. There's a guy named Vaughn is asking, is there any thinking that Keystone XL and now possibly Line 5 is being cut because of risk to U.S. national security?
I don't know. I've heard a lot of arguments to that. One that I hear from one of our chiefs at Wikimikong is the that pipeline is old, and it either needs to be decommissioned or twinned, and obviously with the the beneficiaries out of that pipeline, it's there in itself. And if we cut that off, uh, the railway goes a long way around the lake. So, and the railway infrastructure, let's not even talk about that. I got called the fear mongerer when I talked about shipping oil on rail is far more dangerous than a pipeline. Someone called me a fear monger, but I think if we do have to use the railway or different modes of transport, then we'll get good at it. But let's be smart about it and just do the pipeline and twin it right, eh? I always say this, and I'm going to be asking for royalties from CAP and from SEPA, is that our regulations in pipeline and oil and gas is world class. And they're modernizing them all the time. It's really about making sure that everybody's input is taken in, and that we don't leave anyone out. But our regulations are world class, and we do it right. It costs a little money, but we do it right.
Exactly right. And look at the technology that goes into pipelines now. It is outstanding. It's like going down hole again and making sure you know exactly what's happening every inch of the way along that pipeline. It's quite interesting. I got another question here from Vaughn again. He said it's a little off topic, but he'd like to know, Steve, what you think about an article last week on NORAD and how it will need 11 to 14 billion in investment to get it up to date, with Canada footing 40% of the bill. Are there any conversations going on about what that may mean to giving our customers assurance that our and their energy supply will be protected and continuous?
I
So,
haven't had too much discussion about that. I did see the same article, and then I scratched my head, but that's at an elevation way above my pay grade. Of course we want to make sure that we find that, and that we find a place in it. But right now it's a little outstretched from the Indian Resource Council and what we're trying to do.
yeah, it's one of those things we look at. I mean, what do we need oil and gas for going forward? Defense is one of them. National security, of course, is one of the other mechanisms, and U.S. as well. Once we start being beholden to the world's national oil corporations for the price of oil and the supply of oil, we're in a worse off spot than we are at this point in time as a developed world. That's all the questions I've received so far, Steve.
Yeah.
It's been instructive, I think, for a lot of people. Any last comments you want to give our audience here? And recall that a lot of people will be watching this later on that didn't watch it this time. And if there's any final message that you want to leave with an educated political audience, I think now's the time.
Well, one thing I'll say is, through this whole process, I think with what we're seeing, not only with government and industry, is that there's better relationship building. We talk about consultation, the duty to consult, and for me, it's really about relationship building. Greg, we the Himoke tribe would welcome you, if you ever became a Himoke. And for those who don't know what a Himoke is, it's when Greg McLean walks in my chief and council chambers and one of the elders says, "Who's that white guy?" I'll stand up and say, hey, him okay. So, and when we get to that point where, we don't, that we're not that different, I think we go a long way, and the one thing I want to say about this, the province here in Alberta, my dad, tells me about the wars he had as a leader with other premiers, Stelmach and it wasn't good. Again, we're being dictated to, and it was kind of a soft communism. And despite what our premier Jason Kenney is facing, he's getting ridiculed from the unions and the schools, the teachers and the doctors. One thing he's done was he really stepped up with the First Nations in Alberta, and he created the Crown Corporation, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. I'm very honored and proud to be a vice chair. We took the ribs of a ship and we put it together, and this boat floats. We've supported some deals that are out there. Some First Nations got equity ownership in some of the programs that are projects in their territories, and that's very positive. It's a good step forward, and I think from a national standpoint, the federal government can look at something like that. And I think, again, helping us get away from the dependency of the government is really one of the initiatives that I think is key for a lot of our leaders. And you know what? We don't, I hate to say this, but we don't want to be painted with the same brush, that we're all environmentalists and we're going to stop everything. I want to say that, we're open to discussion, and that, we're very proactive in the economic development and protection of our people, because we have shareholders that aren't born yet. And that's the difference, I think. Industry has shareholders they have to accommodate and make happy. So do we. and when we get a nickel, there's a place for that nickel to go. It's really, the understanding that we're trying to change the system. And again, I can't go too long into the history of the Indian Act, but that governance system is just not working anymore, and we have to change it now. We have to find a better way. It just understand that. And I think, if you really want to educate yourself in the history of our people, I know we have our National Center, Business Center of Excellence. We can do a History 101, and to help people have a one-day course and see the transition from when Columbus got here to where we are today. And it's just really about learning and understanding. And you'll find out we're not that different. We just want to take our space. And I hope people support that. I hope people support that. We don't want to depend on anybody than ourselves to make sure that we can provide for our families. You'll see a man more happy to provide for his family as opposed to him going getting a welfare check. And that's not just my culture, that's everybody. And again, I'll always say it, our natural resource sector is the way our country can, in our communities, can really strive. So
Well said, Stephen. Thank you very much. Fantastic message tonight. I can't thank you enough for joining me here on this political channel, making sure that this message gets known. The development of our resource industry, the development of our economy in Canada depends upon the participation of your organizations. And that is fundamental to our progress going forward here in all respects. So thank you for sharing that message with all our viewers. Everybody, another month from now, it'll be an interesting time. Will we have a pandemic election? We will see if the government actually pulls the pin on this. Let's see what's in the budget here that's going to happen on April 19th. I'll be in Ottawa for that, and I'll be watching intently in the lockup room to see what happens and what's in that, and we'll report back afterwards. Anticipation of all kinds of things, but I'm really pushing on trying to get the government to actually make my private members bill better, and that's on carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and actually in making that part of legislation going forward so that all our development companies can start capturing more carbon and developing our industries in a less carbon producing mechanism going forward. Those are key topics, I think. And if anybody has any questions, there'll be a number of them, I'm certain, after the budget on April 19th. And I'll be answering those on our next Facebook Live. Until then, I look forward to talking to you at any point in time. Good night. Good night, Stephen.
thanks, Greg. Thanks for everybody participating. Thank you very much.